Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am your reporter Shane Michael, and I'll be reporting in behalf of Group 1. Our report is about the first voyage around the world of Magellan by Antonio Pigafetta, or as we like to call it, the Chronicles of Pigafetta, Magellan's expedition around the world. Francisco Antonio Pigafetta, born in the year 1491, died in the year 1531. An Italian nobleman who accompanied Ferdinand Magellan in his fateful circumnavigation of the world. During the expedition, he served as Magellan's assistant and kept an accurate journal which later assisted him in translating the Cebuano language. His travelogue is one of the most important primary sources in the study of pre-colonial Philippines. His surviving journal is the source of much of what is known about Magellan and Elcano's voyage. In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan arrived at Isla de Ladrones, or as they call it, the Island of Thieves, because islanders took whatever they could from his ship as payment for the food and water they had given the crew. This island is presently known as Marianas Islands. March 16, 1521, Pigafetta reported that they reached the Isle of Zamal, presently known as Samar, but Magellan decided to land in another uninhabited island for greater security, where they could rest for a few days. After 2 days, March 18, 9 men came to them and showed joy and eagerness in seeing them and welcomed them with food, drinks, and gifts. They stayed at the Suluan/Zuluan Island, where they exchanged food provisions of bananas, fish, coconuts, and tuba from the friendly native in exchange of red caps, mirrors, combs, bells, ivory, bokasain, and etc. Pigafetta used to describe the people as very familiar and friendly. The natives willingly showed them different islands and the names of these islands. Magellan's fleet landed in another island called Mazawa. Could be either in Limasawa in Leyte or Masao in Butuan. On March 25, Pigafetta reported that they saw two balangay, a long boat full of people in Mazawa. The leader, King Rago, sent his men to the ship of Magellan. The king offered to give Magellan a bar of gold and a chest of ginger. Magellan declined. Instead, Magellan asked for the money for the needs of his ship. The king responded by giving them the needed provisions and food in Chinaware. Magellan exchanged gifts in robes of Turkish fashion, red caps, knives, and mirror. A day after, Magellan and Siago sealed their new friend through a kasi-kasi, or also known as a blood compact. Magellan was introduced to the king's brother, who was also king of another island. In this island, the gold was abundant that a part of the ships and the house of the second king were made of gold. His name is Raya Kulambo, king of Zuluan and Calagan, now known as Butuan and Caragua. Pigafetta described him as the most handsome of all men that he saw in this place. He was adorned with a sick and golden dagger, which he carried with him in a polished wooden sheath. March 31st, Magellan ordered the chaplain to preside the mass by the shore. The king sent 2 dead pigs and attended the mass with the other king. After the mass, Magellan ordered that the cross be brought with nails and crown in place. This mass would go down in history as the first mass in the Philippines. Magellan and his men reached the port of Cebu, the largest and the richest of the islands, with help of Raya Kulambo. The king of Cebu, Raya Humabon, demanded that they pay tribute as it was customary But Magellan refused. Magellan said that he was the captain himself and thus would not pay tribute to the other king. Magellan's interpreter explained to the king of Cebu that it would do them better to make friends with them than to forge enmity. The king offered a bit of his blood to demand that Magellan do the same. Hence, they made a blood compact. Magellan spoke about peace and God, and people took pleasure in his speech. Magellan asked the people who would succeed the king after his reign, and the people responded that the eldest child of the king, who happened to be a daughter, would be next in line. People wished to become Christians through their free will, not because they were forced or intimidated. A mass was held on the shore of Cebu, participated in by Humabon, his wife Amihan, Katharina the daughter, and 800 of his men, and they were baptized as Catholics. Humabon, renamed Don Carlos, was appointed as the king's representative in Cebu, and promised to unite all local chieftains under his authority. After 8 days, all of the island inhabitants were already baptized. When Magellan reiterated that all of the newly baptized Christians need to burn the idols, the natives gave excuses, telling Magellan that they needed the idols to heal a sick man who was a relative to the king. Pigafetta admitted that they burned a village down for obeying neither the king nor Magellan. April 26, a principal man from the island of Mactan named Zula went to see Magellan and asked him a boat full of men so that he could fight the chief named Lapu-Lapu. According to Zula, Lapu-Lapu refused to obey the king and was also preventing him from doing so. Magellan and 60 of his men in 3 vessels along with 1,000 Cebuano fighters in 30 boats. The king of Cebu was instructed by Magellan not to join the battle and stay in the balangay so that he would see how they fought. Magellan invaded Mactan to teach the uncompromising ruler Lapu-Lapu. Pigafetta recounted that when they reached the island, they found that the islanders is 1,500 in number, drawn up to 3 squadrons, and hence the battle began. Pigafetta wrote, "The captain shouted not to fire, but he was not listened to. The islanders, seeing that the shots of our gun did them little or no harm, they shouted more loudly and springing from one side to the other to avoid our shots. They at the time drew nearer to us, throwing arrows, javelins, spears harder than fire, stones, and even mud, so that we could hardly defend ourselves. Some of them cast lances pointed with iron at the captain general. Magellan died in the battle." Magellan was hit by the poisoned arrow and bamboo spear struck his face. Lapu-Lapu and his warriors punched and killed him. Pigafetta recounted that the last moments of Magellan, the captain sacrificed himself just to make sure to give an opportunity for the retreat of his men. Pigafetta also said that the king of Cebu wanted to help in retrieving the body of Magellan, but the people of Mactan refused, for it is a memento of their victory. After the tragic loss and battle, the slave Henry, an interpreter, betrayed them and told the king of Cebu that the remaining fleet intend to leave as quickly as possible. The slave told the king that if he followed his advice, the king would acquire the ships and the goods of Magellan's fleet. The two conspired and betrayed what was left of Magellan's men. The natives had slain all the men except the interpreter and Juan Serrano, who was already wounded. They were killed during the gathering, but Pigafetta was not able to join because he was nursing his battle wounds. The fleet departed and abandoned Serrano. They left Cebu and continued their journey around the world. The remaining survivors of the Magellan expedition finally landed in Tidore, Moluccas, after they fled from the wrath of the Cebuanos. The survivors, under Gomez de Espinosa, sailed back to Spain by crossing the Pacific to Panama, while Victoria, under Juan Sebastian del Cano, sailed via Cape of Good Hope, but on lower latitudes to avoid the Portuguese. On September 6, 1522, Victoria finally reached Sanlúcar, Spain, with only 18 survivors from the original 237 men. The voyage around the world lasted for 2 years, 11 months, and 16 days. Analysis of Pigafetta's Chronicle. The best storyteller is the one who not only knows the story, but saw it. The first voyage around the world of Magellan by Antonio Pigafetta is one of the earliest written accounts, and is one of the most cited documents by historians who wish to study the pre-colonial Philippines. Pigafetta was seen as a credible source for a period which was prior, unchronicled, and undocumented. Pigafetta's work is of great importance in studying and writing of Philippine history. We should recognize certain biases accompanying the author and his identity, loyalties, and the circumstances that he was in, and how it affected the text that he produced. We need to understand that he was a chronicler commissioned by the King of Spain to accompany and document a voyage intended to expand the Spanish Empire. A noble descent came from a rich family in Italy. These attributes influence his narrative, his selection of detail to be included in the text, his characterization of the people and of the species that he encountered, and his interpretation and retelling of the events. Being a scholar of cartography and geography, Pigafetta was able to give details on geography and climate of the places that their voyage has reached. Pigafetta's description to people was coming from 16th century European perspective. He regarded the indigenous belief system and way of life as inferior to Christianity and off to the Europeans. He always remarks on the nakedness of the natives and how he was fascinated by their exotic culture. He emphasized that the natives' amusement and illiteracy to the European artillery, merchandise, and other goods. He repeatedly mentioned the abundance of spices like ginger and of precious metals like gold. Pigafetta's perspective was too narrow to realize that such attire was only appropriate to the tropical climate of the islands. And we should understand that such observations were rooted from the context of Pigafetta and his era.
Did you know Magellan's expedition had a multinational crew? Although it was a Spanish expedition, Magellan's fleet featured a culturally diverse crew. Spaniard and Portuguese made up the vast majority of the sailors, but the voyage also included mariners from Greece, Sicily, England, France, Germany, and even North Africa.
Another fact is Magellan's slave may have been the first person to truly circumnavigate the globe. One of the most important members of Magellan's voyage was his personal slave Enrique, who had been with the captain since an earlier voyage to Malacca in 1511.
Here we go for another trivia of the day. Did you know that the next circumnavigation of the globe took place nearly 60 years after the return of Magellan's expedition? Aha! When the lone vessel Victoria returned to Spain in September 1522, only 18 men remained out of the expedition's original crew of about 260. Circumnavigating the globe ultimately proved to be such a Herculean feat, and the Magellan expedition's success so improbable that it was 58 years before it was repeated, led by the English navigator Sir Francis Drake. This second circumnavigation of the globe first sailed in 1577 and largely followed the same route as Magellan. Like Magellan's Armada, Drake's fleet was also ravaged by the long journey, and only his flagship Golden Hind remained when he returned to England in 1580.
And that is all for our report on the Chronicles of Pigafetta, Magellan's expedition around the world. Thank you for listening and have a great day ahead.